I know there's going to be coaches that are kind of jumping on as they get done with stuff, but I'm gonna kick it off with Colleen Matsuhara. I do just want to give her a brief, quick intro. She's my co-host with over 4 decades in the game. She's been an assistant on 2 national championship teams. She's immensely successful as an assistant, but also as a head coach, leading UC Irvine to their only NCAA tournament appearance in 1995. She's coached the USA basketball, coached in USA basketball and professional basketball with the Sparks, and she's worked in administration at UCLA as assistant athletic director. And she's also served as the secretariat for competition for women's basketball in the '84 Olympics. But my favorite accomplishment is she was the technical advisor and consultant for the classic film Love and Basketball. So please welcome Colleen Matsuhara.
Welcome. Thank you, Matthew, and glad to have you as our speaker, Chris. I've heard so much about you, but first of all, I want to welcome everyone back to the Zoom, Growth Mindset Zoom. I was so anxious that we were resuming. Matthew's laughing, but I got on last Tuesday by mistake. I was all alone in the Zoom room, and I'm thinking to myself, where is everybody? I finally called him, and he said, it's next week. I go, duh. Well, anyway. So I do want to wish all of you a belated, happy, and healthy 2021. Let's hope that this is a much better year than the year that we've just all endured, for whatever reasons. And I want to just, for some of you that are new or need a little refresher, this is called the Growth Mindset Group. So let me just review what growth mindset is. It's the belief that intelligence can be developed, that the brain is like a muscle, that you can train your brain, and it leads to a desire to improve by embracing challenges. And if you approach challenges with a growth mindset, you'll get success. And it's not just our abilities and talents that allow us to always be successful. So that being in mind, that's what we're trying to do with our growth mindset group here. So my little portion here, I talk about 3 different areas, and you're welcome to ask me questions at any of these, but first I always talk about snacks. I'm a big time snacker. The last 3 days I've just been on this splurge. I don't know what it is, but I have nonstop been eating snacks. So I told Matthew that I have quite a plethora today of snacks, but I'll keep it short. My nephew lives in Hawaii. He's visiting me, but he brought me, it's a famous brand, it's Big Island Candies, and he brought me a box of macadamia nut shortbread assorted combo, okay? And it could be the original, which is just a shortbread cookie, or milk chocolate coated. He also gave me a box of Big Island macadamia nut shortbread, which I'm not sharing with anyone. And then I love going to Sprouts Market, and I went to just wash my hands off, and I run into their clearance rack, and you'll laugh. They had a clearance on a lot of their holiday goodies. So let me just tell you, peppermint twist brownie bites. They were normally like $8. They were on special for 99 cents. I'm saying to myself, what's 99 cents? So I bought one of these. On the way home, I opened them up, and my little hand kept digging and popping them into my mouth. They were so good. I went back 2 days later and bought 8 of these, 99 cents. Also, pumpkin spice caramels. They look like gumballs, but you pop them in your mouth, and before you know it, they disappear. So I'm a magician when it comes to snacks, okay? Secondly, my musical tip for the day. Now, I couldn't find a couple of the CDs that I really want to bring up a song. So I ran into one of my favorite soundtracks, well, besides the Love and Basketball soundtrack, but some of you may think I'm a little bit of a geek or a nerd, but I love Forrest Gump, the movie. The soundtrack is a double disc, and most of these songs are way before most of your time. But in this day and age, tomorrow being the inauguration of number 46, there are some good songs here. I love the theme. The Byrds have a song called Turn, Turn, Turn. To everything there is a season. The second song is a group called The Fifth Dimension, Let the Sunshine In. Yay. Also, Jackie DeShannon, What the World Needs Now is Love, Sweet Love. And lastly, The Doors. So it's quite an eclectic group of musical people. The Doors, Break On Through to the Other Side. So that's my musical selection for today. Some of those songs, hopefully we'll all remain safe. Tomorrow being the inauguration. I live in Sacramento, the capital city of California. So they have very much an armed presence around the Capitol building. It's been fenced in with all kinds of National Guardsmen. The police are on high alert. So I'm going to try and stay home tomorrow unless I find a good shopping deal or some more clearance candy at Sprouts. So then lastly, my section here that Matthew always asks me to make a presentation is I talk a little bit about women's basketball history. And I want to tell you that just recently, I'm sure all of you are aware of, but history was made for women's basketball back in December. Last month on December 15th, Tara Vanderveer, the Stanford women's basketball coach, became the winningest women's basketball collegiate coach. She had been tied with the late, great Pat Summitt, and she beat Pacific 104-61, and that was her 1,099th win. Since that time, she has 6 more victories. She's now at 1105. However, last Sunday, as the #1 team in the country, they did get upset by Colorado in overtime at CU. But in 35 years at Stanford, she's established a legacy of success. She's in 2 Hall of Fames, both the Naismith and the Women's Basketball Hall of Fame. She started her career coaching at the University of Idaho for 2 years. And from there, she became the Ohio State coach for 5 years. And then the rest of her coaching career has been at Stanford. This is her 35th year at Stanford. While she's been there, she has 2 NCAA championships in 1990, 1992. Her Cardinal team has made 12 Final Fours. They've won 22 Pac-12 titles. 4 times she's been National Coach of the Year. 15 times she's been the Pac-12 Coach of the Year. In 1996, she was the Olympic coach and led the USA to the gold medal. Now, 41 years later, she's still coaching with the same passion, the same integrity. She has sustained excellence at Stanford. And I have the privilege of knowing Tara as a friend and a colleague, but I will tell you this, in all the years I've known Tara, she's done this game that we all love. She's done it with class, dignity, leadership, integrity, and she is one of the most humble people you could ever run into. She's grateful to everyone who helped make her successful. Her players really display what Tara's all about, and I really admire her and wish her continued another 41 years of coaching. Little side note, I think today Connecticut's coach Gino is going to tie Pat Summitt. It was halftime when I checked the score. Connecticut was comfortably ahead of Butler, and if they go on to win, he will then surpass Pat in women's basketball victories, but he'll still be behind Tara. Not by much though. And then I want to just throw this in there because I was talking to Matt. The Washington State Cougars, the women's team, last Monday, not yesterday, they were ranked number 25 in the country. They had the day previously upset Arizona in overtime. So that earned them their very first ranking. That was the school's first ever national ranking. That was the final Power 5 team to get ranked. So just a little bit of trivia, but Cammie Etheridge is the coach. She is one of my favorite people. I was able to coach her when I was at the University of Texas. She was the starting point guard for us the year we won the championship. And she's in her 3rd year, and she's a very competitive person, one of the most competitive people I've ever known. They were picked to finish last, both by the media and by the league coaches. And like I said, last week, I was very excited and proud for her. However, and Matthew, you know this, you had a firsthand look and probably had a hand in this. They went to Los Angeles this past weekend, lost 2 in overtime to both SC and UCLA, so they fell out of the rankings. But I just wanted to give a shout out to Cammie. I know she's going to get things done, and that's our women's basketball tips for today and snacks.
Thank you, Colleen. Just fabulous. Every time you do that, I learn something, and most of the time I learn a lot of things. And that little session was no exception. I mean, very, very good. Thank you so much for always doing that, Colleen, and
Welcome.
always coming up with great facts and stories about teams. Some of the stories that you have are just priceless. But thank you very much.
You're quite welcome. And my snacks. I'd love
And
to
your
share
snacks,
my-
of course, that we can't have around our house because I will eat them all. But coaches that have come in the last few minutes, I wanted to welcome you to the Growth Mindset Coaching Group. Colleen Matsuhara just got finished giving us some history of women's basketball. But up next, I am just thrilled and honored that this gentleman would even return an email or text. Coach Chris Oliver, I'll go through to give him a proper introduction. He's got a record of 186 wins and 100 losses at University of Windsor in Canada. He was the 3-time OUA Coach of the Year, had 6 West Division regular season titles, 2 West Division playoff titles, 1 OUA Wilson Cup Conference Championship, and 3-time U Sports National Championship appearances. And I understand Coach Dave Smart is also. You had to beat him out. Well, let's see, for your 3 Coach of the Years, right? And in the conference championship in the OUA. Oh, so this guy can coach. Trust me.
Yeah, no, you know what? You could probably just stop the bio and just say, I beat Dave more than any other coach in Canada, which means very little,
Oh.
But I don't have to get into resources and differences, but Dave's tremendous. And there's really good Canadian coaches all in all. So.
Hey, Chris, can I ask you a question before you start?
You can ask me anything. That's why I'm here.
Are you currently coaching?
I am not.
Oh, okay.
I'm currently a theorist, which you'll see.
And let me also just mention that Coach Oliver represented Canada as the 3D Global Sports head coach for the 40th William Jones Cup, where they won gold in 2018. And I've heard you talk a little bit about that, and I'm so interested to hear about how what you've learned at Windsor and the way you coach now, how that translated to your international team and your elite level athletes. But I'll just kick it over to you, and this is very informal, so there could be questions anytime. You could talk about, I definitely have a list of things that I'd like to ask you about, but your basketball immersion is fascinating. Your basketball decision training in 0 seconds. I mean, it's basketball's decisions, and it's training the decisions in our players against defense, and players learn by doing and not by listening to a coach talk. And I think you've mentioned that, and I couldn't agree more. And so, Coach, I'll pass it off to you to just talk a little bit about the things you're working on today, and then we'll get into your how you coach that Jones Cup team.
Well, thank you, Matthew. It's tremendous to be here. It's an honor. I'm humbled every time I get to share the game. And that's what I'm grateful for, really, is that I get a chance now to be able to be full-time dedicated towards sharing the game. And coach education has always been a huge passion, not just basketball, but coach education in general. And anyone that's listened to the podcast or has kind of seen some of the people that I've been able to interact with, I really do value being around people with growth mindsets and divergent thinking. Because again, at the end of the day, if we all did it the same, this wouldn't be as interesting or as challenging. And that's what I'm here to do. And when Matt talked about decisions, my wheelhouse through the years has been a games approach to coaching. Those of you that remember some of the research going back 20, 25 years, they had different words for it: game sense, games approach. Essentially it's playing offense versus defense. And that's the simplest form when we talk about basketball, is that, and this has been echoed by coaches on the podcast when I've kind of pushed them to kind of answer some of the questions, but a lot of coaches don't play enough in practice. And that's been a mindset that I didn't necessarily understand until I traveled the world in 2015 doing a sabbatical, and went to I think it was about 50 plus practices around the world, top level Barcelona, EuroLeague type teams on down to, high school teams. And it was just tremendous to be able to see. But what I saw is that a lot of practices, there wasn't a lot of basketball being played. And that to me was always confusing. And that's what really inspired me to start Basketball Immersion and be able to share authentically what we do and how we did it. And this will, and I have a presentation I'm happy to go through, or I'm happy to answer questions any way you want to do it. But to circle back to Matt's question about coaching internationally, I felt it was one of the easiest things in terms of a transition for me, because we at Windsor, since I was there, so I was at Windsor for 14 years, we got to host NCAA Division I teams on their foreign tours. So we're very fortunate that Windsor's right across the border from Detroit. So, Kentucky, Ohio State, Virginia Tech, that level of team on down to lower Division I's and Division II, Division III's came through our place in August. And essentially what I learned through that process is we had to get right to the point. So I was fully in on a games approach, meaning that the majority of our practices at the collegiate level were 5-on-5. We basically did, and I went a whole season with only 5-on-5 outside of shooting. And I'll talk about that if you want to get into that. Everything else was 5-on-5. We did no breakdown. We did no warm-up drills of, full court passing or anything like that. We played basketball in practice. And what I learned from that and what I learned from hosting these Division I's is get right to the point. Like, if you really want to develop your players and start to build this growth mindset in your players, then my philosophy, which holds through with a lot of the evidence-based research, is hard first instruction. So essentially what that means is throw them in the deep end and then see if they can swim. And if they can't, then help them with what they're having problems with swimming. And as we know, each player is different in terms of that. So a whole mindset was when we started to play these Division I's, I was like, what am I doing? I don't have time for these slow buildups and these slow installs and worrying about this or that. It was like, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to do this. We're going to do this. We're going to do this. We're going to practice at 5-on-5. And we'd have 4 or 5 practices to get ready to play Kentucky and compete. And it just really helped. And that's obviously an international experience where you have a really short time. We had that roster together for really 2 days before we traveled because of money and different things like that. So it was like, we get right to the point. 5-on-5 inbound, 5-on-5 install, no 5-on-0 install at all. And I'll talk about that. So Matthew or someone remind me to come back to what's a reconnection and what I mean by that. But the idea being is that we get to the point, and then from there I can identify it. I've never understood, and I'm not here to criticize, I'm not here to sell, I'm here to share. But in this sense, I've never understood how we can start a season with these great season plans and these great understandings of, I'm going to do this week, I'm going to do this next week, I'm going to do this day. And it looks great on paper. But at the end of the day, what I always felt was the best thing was to go into a season and play that first practice 5-on-5 with some understanding of how we want to play with this team, but then figure it out a little bit through that process as well about what I would actually teach instead of predetermining what I'm going to teach. And that can only happen through gameplay. And I don't know how many of you are assistant coaches. The other tremendous value for a head coach and for assistants is two-way teaching. You're not a defensive coach, you're not an offensive coach, even though you have a role, you learn how to coach both sides of the ball at the same time, and you learn how to coach the game when you're in practice. And I'm on record talking about the NCAA model in terms of coach development, but they do a really poor job. And the women's game does a much better job with their mentorship model through WBCA and all the different stuff like that. But the only thing that truly develops you as a coach is getting to coach. And the hard part for assistants especially is you don't get those opportunities much. When I was developing coach in Canada, and we still don't have rules like this, I could be an assistant at college. I could coach a high school team, a girls team, a boys team, whatever it was that was available, I coached. And I learned because I coached. And then all of a sudden, when I'm running my first practice as a head coach at 28, I've already coached probably 700 games and I've run 500 practices. So it wasn't this new experience. And that's really difficult to develop in that way if you can't have those reps. So the reps have to come through practice. And that's another mindset of playing a lot of 5-on-5 in practice or 3-on-3 or small sided games, is because you get offense versus defense. And as a coach, you are evaluating, coming up with your solutions, your interventions, your questions for players, your stimulation for your players through game-based play. And in a real roundabout way, that's where everything from basketball immersion evolved from. And Again, happy to answer any questions. I have a little bit of a presentation, Matthew. It's up to you if you want me to go through it or not. And you can absolutely stop me at any time.
Absolutely. I'd say, how long would you say the presentation is?
Depends on your questions. It depends on how much I
I'd
like
say let's
hearing
do it.
myself talk.
I'd say let's do it. I'd love to find out more.
Okay.
Absolutely.
And again, please do not hesitate. If someone raises their hand or they want to interrupt me, this is not meant to be a formal presentation in that sense. I'm just here to, as I said, share. And I put my Twitter, which my DMs are open, so at BBallImmersion, and I put my new California cell, just got it, in the chat too. So feel free, text me if you like, or WhatsApp, whatever your preference is. But this is my daughter. So maybe even before I get to that, that's painful. It's painful to watch as a coach. And that's the hardest thing for us to do as a coach, is because we have a solution. We can give it to the player and they can solve the problem and they can look better much faster. But what we know about true learning is true learning comes from struggle, right? The things that are easy, that doesn't lead to the depth of satisfaction and the depth of learning that challenge does. So me being okay watching my daughter struggle is a huge part of the coaching process. The other part is that's learning. Alone in a gym, pausing, thinking, visualizing, being free to explore without pressure and instruction, being free of judgment or comparisons. And to me, that's such a huge part. And I know Matt already asked me this about the podcast and some of the things I've taken away from the podcast. And I'm going to come back to this psychological safety. And that's come through the best coaches in the podcast, is how do we create this environment where our players can learn in this environment where they can be free of judgment or comparisons. What we know, learning is not linear. It's non-linear. It's filled with imperfect repetitions. And that's a huge part of that. So what I evolved that to is obviously this notion, which is you're bad at something. And I think the hardest thing to do for coaches, especially at the levels you coach at, is to work backwards now and to teach players about a growth mindset that they should have learned years ago, or they should be normalized. Well, what we know is not normal. We know that mistakes are not normal for most people. They don't accept them. They don't like them. They try and coach them out of you. But what we know about learning is you're not good to start with. Every single one of us goes through this process of being bad, and then we get better, and then we get okay, and then we get good, and then hopefully we get great. But that process is important. And if I cheat those steps for my players, then the depth of learning can be impacted. And that's a big part of kind of what I share. And it's relative to some of these things. It's really uncomfortable sometimes, right? But watching her size up the rim, try and figure it out herself, and I use that terminology a lot, figure it out, is such a huge part of what I try and get people to understand. And just so you see, she's alone in the gym. And some of you from LA and that area would know the gym, but it was such an amazing environment. So how do we create a safe environment where creativity and improvement can be shaped along with skills and decisions? So the question I ask to coaches often is, are skills and decisions independent or interdependent of each other? And my argument is, and this may be controversial in some ways, but even from a youth player, my daughter on up, what I feel is more important is the decision. The decision is more important than the skill. Now, let me give you an example of that. If we're talking about players shooting layups, okay, yes, I can teach them my daily dozen. 6 shots they're going to do every day over and over again, and they're going to repeat it on air, and then we're going to add it to guided, and then we're going to go to live, and then we're going to add it to the game, and we're going to go from there. So I can spend a ton of time on building skill from on air to live. Or I cannot care how they finish. just that they make the right decision to finish. And if I spend more time, I believe, on the decision, I'll try and connect this back for you with perception action. If I spend more time on the decision, then I'm going to have more of an impact on their ability to be able to finish a layup. And I think we spend an obsessive amount of time on perfect skill rather than an obsessive amount of time on, did they make the right decision? Was it the right decision to shoot the layup in the first place? And was it the right layup to shoot given that situation? Well, we know that not every player has the same solution available to them. So again, me predetermining what solution they should have doesn't help a player evolve the problem-solving skills that lead to creativity. And that's a huge part of what I try and coach too, is to develop that. Look, there's not one way to do it, but did your way make sense? And that can be a discussion that can involve a whole bunch of other things. So from the podcast, these two things have come through. From day one to, the most recent podcast, Mike Kelly will be on from Taipans tomorrow from the Australia NBL. But these questions have come up all the time, which is how to help a skill evolve. And what, to me, it comes back to is these two things: create a safe environment and then support it when they use it. I can't tell you how many times I get to watch practices and I see coaches do really great jobs with practice design, with everything that you would think would be a great practice. But what they never do is support something when it's actually done. We're really good as coaches. And now listen, I've made all these mistakes. I still make all these mistakes. But what I'm really good at is telling people when they do things wrong. I'm really good at that. Like, I can always tell them when they do it wrong. You know what I have to be conscious of and become aware of all the time is to support them when they use it. And I'm not talking about false praise. I'm talking about finding something that they couldn't do before and now they can do, and notice it. So noticing progress is such an important part of this help a skill evolve. And I would have coaches, if I had the staff and if I had coaches, much like UCLA's budget there, then I would have a coach dedicated to every day connecting game to skill or decision and saying, that's what we worked on. And I'll come back to that, but that's what we worked on. That's what we worked on with you. And now you can do it. Oh, okay. You couldn't do it before. Now you can do it. That to me is the ultimate, is them understanding they couldn't and now they can. And it doesn't always have to be from, as I said, good to great. It's sometimes from suck to okay. And that's part of learning as well. So that's a huge part of this. And I'm going to show you this, but when we think of learning, we often imagine organization too, which is, school, rows of desks, chairs in a classroom, a coach running you through drills or a teacher lecturing to you. But is this really what learning is? And that is a question that you have to consider, because too often we want our practices to look perfect. And what we know is learning is not perfect. Learning is not about doing something perfect. And in fact, if your players can do something perfect in your practices, that's not learning. It means they can already do it. They can already do it. And we kind of sometimes get lost in that because we look at, oh, they're so good. We can run this great play 5-on-0, or we can do this great drill, but they can do it. So it's our challenge for coaches. And Bjork, famous UCLA professor, he coined the term desirable difficulties. And that's something that I constantly come back to with all my players, is finding that desirable difficulty, that optimal challenge, so that we can challenge them to be better in that type of environment that's going to be. So this drill was an example of what I used to do. I was like, oh, this looks so good. They're going so fast. They're getting faster. They're all on a line. They're working perfect. And then I was like, okay, well, wait a minute. There's something wrong here. Because I want my players to truly get better, then I want them to play more basketball. Well, sometimes that disconnects with what we talk about in terms of player development. I personally wouldn't consider player development and team development two separate things. In my ideal world, they're the same, because I would never do an individual player development workout with one player, except for isolated shooting training. Otherwise, I feel my value as a coach is coach-led development means connecting skills and decisions to game context. What players should be doing on their own is players should be doing player-led development. And all the best players do this. And you can all reflect on the best players that have been the ones that do this. Player-led development, on-air shooting, on-air reps, mass block repetitions. That's all stuff that my players should do on their own. But if I'm present as a coach, I feel my job is to be able to connect skills and decisions to the game. And that means we need more than just one player to do that. We need more than one player to do that. So how do I make that drill I just showed you, that dribbling drill, better? My argument is, number one, let them shoot. I learned this coaching kids at a very young age, and it continues on to this day and with my college team. We never do anything that doesn't end in a shot. Like, if we're talking about connecting players to the enjoyment and the fun, the love in basketball of playing the game, it's shooting. Like, we can BS each other, as coaches, which we don't, because we know it's a lie, but we do BS players all the time and tell them in high school or youth level, oh, just be a hard worker. Oh, just be a great defensive player. Do you know what we all want? We want really talented offensive players who understand what a work ethic is. Because those are the ones we can teach defense, and you see that the NCAA game is tremendous. There's so many great defense programs. You can teach defense, but to be really skillful on offense is the ultimate goal. And why do a lot of players drop out? You talk about the, girls high school basketball, which I had a chance to coach, girls club AAU basketball I had a chance to coach before I became a college coach. And it was always the same thing. They didn't see the value in them being on the floor because they weren't getting to shoot ever. They weren't getting to play basketball. They were a screener, they're a passer, they're a cutter. And to me, that's a problem at the youth level that I want to change. So we're going to make sure that we shoot every day, and every drill ends in a shot. I'll show you an example in there. And then I've already talked about those other two things. So a simple change, and this is a camp setting, this isn't a team setting, but now you do those two pylons right there, and it always ended in a shot. You can prescribe the shot, you can give them possibilities, which in this example, we call this a back pivot. Some people call it different things in terms of the type of finish. But if you go on Basketball Immersion, you just search back pivot, you'll see a whole blog and some videos. But all they're doing now is they have 3-4 possibilities of the back pivot. They can choose which one. And then a natural progression, obviously, we would be able to incorporate this into one-on-one. Or if we're not ready for that, then obviously you can go back and do some guided type of finishing. But that would be a general idea in terms of changing and manipulating a drill. More so with me is, if we're not going to go live, we're going to use what we call BDT, basketball decision training. This was all inspired, and most of this stuff is evidence-based, meaning it goes back to sport researchers and education-based researchers that have, again, they've studied this. They haven't necessarily extrapolated it to basketball, and that's where the challenge of all this research and evidence-based stuff is. You ultimately have to decide in a basketball environment, does what happened in a lab or what happened in a controlled environment or what happened in this study apply to basketball, and that's a challenge. But BDT, basketball decision training, again, I'll give you a link if you're not familiar with this, but there's tons of free stuff all over YouTube and my basketball immersion on BDT. The idea is now that this player here is going to become an active participant in their process of development by giving them some decision cues. Simplest is hands up means pass, hands down means shoot, step towards them, it encourages a drive. It was my attempt to be able to bridge the gap between on-air repetitions and live offense versus defense. Ultimately, live offense versus defense, that's it. Do that. If you're not ready for that, or if you need to reconnect, meaning go backwards and connect something that you've taught, then you can go back to these type of things. But what I always want to do in my workouts, end it in a shot and engage the mind. I don't want to have any mindless training after initial learning. And most of your players, you're not talking about initial learning. You're talking about connecting, perception, decision, skill execution, and feedback on what happened. That's called the perception action coupling process, if you know the terminology. If not, you can go look up perception action. And that's a tremendous podcast as well. There's a perception action podcast, which is tremendous. It talks about a lot of the research. But the main thing here is we want to connect the skill, the decision. But what we know about all that is perception happens first. So before I execute a skill, I first perceive and then I decide. So I perceive and then I decide. And then the third thing is skill execution. So again, when we start with this build from skill up, then we're neglecting the two things that happen first, which are perception and decisions. And that's really the mindset of what this is. And I'll show you, I'll let you. So we're trying to create random practice so he doesn't know when he's going to shoot. And that is a problem with most shooting drills. Most shooting drills, we prescribe to the player when they're going to shoot. Well, the problem obviously is that doesn't transfer and connect to the game as well, because in the game, only a free throw is the only time that you know when you're going to shoot. Otherwise, everything is based in a game on perception and decision before execution. So coaches all the time frame things to me as, oh, you know, we're doing game-like drills. Well, because they're coming off of a down screen in your offense and they're shooting on air, that's a game-like drill. It's absolutely not a game-like drill, because game-like means there's a decision prior to a skill execution. And it's semantics, and I'm not here to criticize the word game-like or the use of it, but I'm trying to frame it in a way that you understand. Another one is game speed. We got to go game speed. Oh, you're not going game speed. Only game speed that exists is offense versus defense. Everything else is a simulation and not a real simulation, because when we do on-air drills, players tend to work too hard, to be honest, and not simulate truly what happens in a game. And we know basketball is very much an anaerobic game in terms of, you know, the changes in the applications of different types of physical components to it. So that's a big part of it as well. Like game-like means offense versus defense, and it means decisions. And that's the exciting part about what I'm trying to share with coaches is, like, obviously playing 5-on-5 all practice solves it. But the other thing is to make sure that your players don't do mindless repetitions. So connecting this back growth mindset a little bit is, so there was, and I apologize, I'll probably forget them all. I think Coach Corey started the first podcast, and then I had Brett Bouchard, and then I can't remember. I think John Tower might have been next, coach at St. Thomas University. So there are kind of like 3 or 4 podcasts in a row, which were all basically psychological based. And it was intentional, because what I was learning as I was interacting with so many coaches is, this is the one part that coaches didn't spend enough time on. We all talk about relationships. Relationships are important. I would argue what's even more important is creating this psychological safety, you know, and every day, and this is a huge regret, by the way, if I went back to coaching, I would spend more time on this. Do I belong? Every day, helping a player understand that they belong. Whatever their role, they belong. Are they doing well? Yeah, every day connecting them to that they're doing something well and they belong. And then what can you rephrase to create safety? Think about some of the things that we say as coaches. And if you don't do this as an assistant or a head coach already, please record yourself. Get whoever you can to record you in practice and listen to yourself. Listen to yourself in a game. If someone will record you, your coach will let you do that. It is amazing the things that we say that, again, send the wrong message, aren't exactly what we mean, are taken out of context, or just aren't specific enough to be able to help an athlete. I'll give you an example. Matthew comes to practice late. The first thing I say to him is, why were you late? No, it could be just, why were you late? Doesn't have to be a tone of negativity, but why were you late? What we should do is we think about rephrasing things in that example. It's like, Matthew, I'm happy you're here. Why were you late? It's a completely different conversation if I can kind of rephrase things, even when it's potentially a negative, like he's late, into a, okay, you're safe and we're happy you're here, you belong, but now let's talk about why you're late, right? And that tends to be a thing. And I know coaching is changing a lot. I'm grateful for that in terms of some of these things that we used to do as coaches, and now we know it's not probably the best way. So this safety component has been a huge thing that's shone through for me, and something that, to be honest, I would like to improve at as well. I'll pause if you want for any questions about that before I go to the next thing, if you'd like. I don't know if that's kind of what you're interested in, Matthew. That's the other part. Let me know.
This is absolutely perfect. that you're going through all this. It's Chris, thank you. Yeah, let's open it up to questions. I'm sure people have, I know I do, but let's open it up. Anybody have something they like to, I just like to.
Matthew, before that, can I make a point, by the way, which is really cool? You know, anytime we ask that of players, do you have any questions? Or do you ask a question of your player? You know, hey, Pierre, what was your thought process on this down screen? Do we pause? Do you pause? Because that is such a huge part of the learning process that also is neglected. Because basketball is this intense, we've got to be hard workers, we've got to be intense type of sport. As coaches, we tend to not pause. What happens during the pause? Thinking. Like if we don't pause, they don't think. And what we love, because we're intense and we know the answers as coaches, Pierre, why don't you, what are you thinking on this down screen? You should, like, instead of pausing, I immediately go into, I ask a question and then I answer the question for him. And that takes away a learning experience from players, right? And I am okay. I've got uncomfortable in the pause.
Well said.
Coach, I got a question. This is Danelle Bishop from Cal Poly Pomona, and I'm excited to be on here today and learning a ton. I just felt relieved to hear tonight that you're a firm believer in, I don't know, I call it a lot scrimmaging, but playing. And even on the first practice, I was like, whew, all right, I must be doing something okay, because I don't hear that a ton. So that was really awesome to hear. I wanted to go back to your doing some of the quote unquote drills live, having them make decisions. We're really big on that too, but I also do a lot of progression. So we'll come off of that down screen first, just working on the footwork, and we teach the right foot plant, left foot plant, as well as the hop. We try to do all that. So we'll do that, but then we'll throw a dummy D out, and then we'll go live after that. So we kind of do this like progression up to it. And so I just kind of wanted to get your thoughts on that.
So progressions are positives. So let's start with that. We'll frame it psychologically safe, Dano. So that's a great question. But they also take away from time on task. So they take away from active learning time, learning by doing, of things that actually happen in the game. So my only thought on what you just said is I would start with the end and then figure out what they need to use rather than go in and predetermine the progressions. And I think that applies to most learning. Is how about we just start with, I don't know, what would the example would be of a shooting drill that you do 2-on-1 shooting, say. That's a common thing that we do, 2-on-1 shooting. So at least there's one defender now. You're working on the cut off the down screen. They catch it. The defender's either there or not there. They either shoot it or they pass it and then they relocate. Something like that. I don't know what the end result is. But that, and then looking at them and saying, okay, what do I need to coach in that player? Because it's going to be different. And that is the other part that you have to decide as a coach. And this, what are your absolutes? What are your absolutes that this absolutely has to happen? And I'll give you a quick example, but in this example, do you care what footwork they use? Some coaches care a lot about the footwork. Some coaches don't. I personally don't care about perfect technique. I care about technique that works. Right. And that's the thing. Like, instead of having all my players shoot off 2 feet or shoot at 1-2, I care. Are you comfortable with this? Are you comfortable with this? And if they're not, or if they really struggle, then I'm going to go with what I believe. But that's such a challenge for us as coaches to decide what's an absolute.
Yeah. And I think for us, some of it has been based off of, I guess how talented our team is. And some of them, after we play that first day, I kind of know, okay, hey, we got to break things down a lot with this particular group or this set of players. And then some other players, it just comes a little bit more natural. And that can maybe be the levels as well. We're Division II, and it could be the various levels. I don't know if that's true.
I think what you're saying applies to all levels, honestly.
Okay.
And honestly, to the NBA on down.
Okay.
And I've had a lot of interactions with the NBA and WNBA. Nikki Colleen has been outstanding, kind of helping me understand that league. And it's the same thing. Like, it's just certain players need certain things and certain other players don't. And that's where we have to, again, evaluate, is that working or is it not working? And that comes back to a whole bunch of things. And, you know, I know it's much better in the modern game too, to not label players. You know, my ideal is to go into a gym anywhere in the US or Canada, wherever I am, and say to all those youth players, I say, what position do you play? And they all put up their hand and they say basketball player. That's the goal, right? But you know what? It's still, everyone puts up their, I'm a point guard, you're a basketball player. You know, and that's really what the game's becoming. So I think that's exciting. So I don't think the level, I just think it's exactly what we just talked about, which is, you know, throw them in the deep end and then determine what you need to reconnect, what you need to connect in some cases, or what you need to reconnect. So same thing applies mid-season. If my players are struggling with pivoting, because we're going to play, you know, we turned it over, we just didn't get out of pressure situations very well, then I will go back mid-season and maybe do some type of pivoting drill to reconnect. Well, what is that? Am I really teaching pivoting at that point? No, what I'm doing is emphasizing. So drills, I think, are good for emphasis. I don't think they're as good as we think for connecting and transferring to the game.
Nice.
Great
Thank
question.
you.
Oh, and by the way, is Danelle?
It's Danelle, like duh. That's
it.
what I tell people, duh.
Danelle. So here's your phrasing, by the way, if you want to sell this in the future. Do we have to wait to the end of the meal to eat dessert? Like, I don't know how many, I know Colleen loves dessert, so, or snacks, you know, like, why do you have to wait to the end? That's how players feel about basketball practice. Yeah. And in this age where like everyone's transferring, that's not the players, you know, they have more opportunities, all these different things. And I'm not going to get into that too much, but have we looked at, are we providing athlete satisfaction? That means, do they show up in practice and get to play basketball?
Yeah. And I noticed that too. We try to keep our practice short, but we try to, like, we'll do a couple different, maybe it's drills. So we do a lot of fundamental stuff kind of in the beginning, just to kind of get them going. And then we'll do some type of scrimmage. Maybe it's 3-on-3, maybe it's 5-on-4, and we're working on transition stuff. And then we do save they get all excited every day for the scrimmage, and my assistants coach the teams, and it's a pretty big, it's competitive, it's a big deal, but we do play different games throughout. And I learned a lot of that from Gina Johnson on here. I actually played for her. I think it is important, and it keeps them engaged, and I think that's really important.
So that's my thing to coaches. If you want to mix in drills, just start practice with 5-on-5 sometimes. Again, like, why do you have to wait to the end, leave the midway and do drills at the end, or just mix it up? Because as we know, like, we're constantly trying to challenge them, and we're constantly trying to do repetitions without being repetitive, right? Like, we're trying to do the same repetitions without it seeming repetitive.
That's a good idea. Thank you.
So Chris, I have a question. If you said that the end result, so let's say the end result is the ball's going through the basket, the basket's being made, and you've got different types of shooting forms. So what's your cue there for, because a lot of coaches will say, okay, let's all get our elbow tucked in, follow through, hold that follow through, things like that. But I guess the bottom line is, does the ball go in the hoop and give you 2 or 3?
That's it. Yeah. So there's commonalities, I think, to all great shooters. There's commonalities to all great finishers, right? There's some things that are like, we know you should be balanced. We know there should be a follow through, whether you hold it or not. We know there should be your body working in one motion, this kinetic flow, this kinetic chain. We know there's some things like that, but at the end of the day, what we know is not every player has the same anatomy. Not every player has the same development structure, all these different things that come into it. I remember, and Colleen can remember this, a lot of us maybe going to summer camps when they used to tell you, oh, you got to have your elbow in, like, put your elbow out and then turn your shoulder in. What do you feel in your shoulder? A ton of tension. I couldn't believe that somebody was telling me I need to have tension in my shoulder. And what we know about shooting, and this is one of my cues that I always ask shooters, is before I even evaluate much, I just want to, does it feel effortless? Does it feel effortless? Does your motion feel effortless? That means, is your body working in this motion where you aren't extra exertions, extra pushes, extra hip turns, extra segments of your body working opposite each other, all these different things. So it's such a great question. So this is, again, I'm a theorist right now, but I actually did this, and I'm doing this with my daughters. Don't tell them, but I'm never going to teach them a finishing move. I don't care how they finish. I just want them to finish. Right. And that's the whole point of all this is like, okay, here's possibilities, here's solutions. Right. So how we frame it to them, open versus closed window. That's my question. Did you shoot it with an open window or did you shoot it with a closed window? And obviously, what's the goal? Whether it's a Euro step or it's a scoop instead of a lift, you're trying to find an open window to shoot the ball. And that's such a key part of that too. So less emphasis on technique and more emphasis on, as I said, the decision. Now, that doesn't mean we can't use implicit instruction and actually tell them, listen, I think this is the best solution you should look at in this situation. There's nothing wrong with implicit instruction. It's just wrong if everything's implicit instruction and everything's an absolute. A quick example, I had a chance to watch a really famous coach you'd all know run a practice, ran a great practice, but this one drill was this closeout drill, which I know we're all obsessed with. Closeouts we should not be obsessed with. Run and stop. Run full speed and stop. That's what a closeout is. So your decision is more based on scout. That's what we should be teaching on the closeout. It's the decision when you're running and stopping. It's not the technique. Okay, well, I need to have this. How about run and stop in the right place? That, in my opinion, is the most important part of the closeout. And if you ask a lot of NBA, WNBA coaches, they don't spend any time teaching closeouts. They just teach, again, decisions. Run and stop short of this person, run and stop close to this person, right? Or some variation of that. We all have our different variations. So when I watched this coach run this closeout drill for 10 minutes, he made the team run for every time the pinky wasn't in the right place on the closeout. So that team in that 10-minute drill probably actually did less than a minute of closeouts, and everyone ran for every time the pinky wasn't right. And you guys can all picture these drills. You've been there, you've seen these things, and it was just fascinating. But what was most fascinating, which helped me much in terms of helping you understand what I'm talking about, when they went to play 5-on-5, he never stopped it once because of the technique in the closeout. You know when he stopped it? When the decision was wrong. And I've seen this time and time again. I've had a chance to sit in on an NBA film session with a player where they went through this player kind of in an off-season review and talked about some of the things. They had 10 clips for him. In all 10 of those clips, it represented decisions. It represented decisions. It wasn't technique. It wasn't like, hey, listen, you should have jump stopped here off 2 feet and turned your shoulder more. It was like, look, if you took one more dribble, you got deeper, and that's a better percentage shot versus you stopping here, that type of thing. So that's what I mean. So I'm not saying don't teach skills. I'm not saying don't teach on air. I'm not saying don't teach blocked. I'm just saying let's really challenge ourselves to think about what actually connects and transfers to help a player in the game. And that's really what, if you know anything about transfer and the different types of research around that, it's mainly based on perceptions. Biomechanical technique is not the most important part of transferring to game-based play when we're talking about basketball, right? Because it's an open environment. We're playing against unpredictable opponent and unpredictable teammates. So much of the technique is what am I doing in those spaces and what am I doing in that in terms of the decisions.
I'll just mention.
I tend to go on tangents, but thanks for staying with me.
Just to back up your point, we just played Washington State over the weekend. I don't know if you've had a chance to watch their women's team, Chris.
Can I tell you a quick story?
Sure.
This is not to tell you that I'm going to help your program, but Charlize Leger-Walker, when I was in New Zealand, I have good friends in New Zealand. So I had a chance to watch her. I've had a chance to interact with her. I tried to send her to a number of places before I knew UCLA. So, but man, she's a real deal.
And I was just going to mention, on your point, we had conversations with the staff about her and her sister, and it came up, well, she can't pass with her left hand. And my kind of thought was she can get the ball to wherever she wants.
Who cares?
She has that hook pass over a double team on the money. I mean, the creativity she plays with, and I mean, it is like, she's kind of embodies what you're talking about. It's like, she plays with creativity. She makes amazing decisions. And that's why she's so effective. It's not, you look at her out, out on the playground, you wouldn't pick her in the top, she's not, her body does not make her a Pac-12 player. Her decisions makes her a Pac-12 player. And I'm just backing you up on the points you're making here.
So the one hand passing, Matthew, that's such a key thing, right? Like, that used to be such a fundamental jump stop, pass with two hands. And here's the way I frame it. Think about skill not as the addition of something. It is sometimes the addition of something, but also think of it as the removal of something. And think about, my efficiency improves when I don't have to touch the ball with my other hand. My speed improves when I don't have to touch the ball with my other hand to pass the ball. And again, the decision, like we talk about, this whole thing, well, if you pass with two hands, you're going to pull it back if you're making the wrong decisions. Put up your hand how many times in your career you've seen someone actually do that. Like, the decision to pass is made before the execution. So they're in motion, they're making it. And that's where I come back to, again, it's the decision, not the skill part of that makes it effective. So, the one hand pass and the ability to be able to pass off the dribble and all those different things that she has, man, you're going to see that all 5 players on the floor at some point are going to have that in your programs. And that's going to be so much fun to coach.
Hey, Chris, thanks for doing this. This is great. Matthew and Colleen, thank you again for bringing this back. I know you guys been taking a quick break, but this is always great to see you guys and the guests. Well, Chris, sometimes whenever, for me personally, I don't know if you guys all agree, but sometimes when you start thinking about things, especially in the game, and whatever goes through your mind, well, for me, what goes through my mind, I'm thinking, am I just crazy? Am I just crazy for thinking this way? But whenever I'm hearing all this thing you're saying, it's the exact same thing I'm saying. I had this long conversation with my head coach just the other day, and the other staff members, is just about the more so the decision making than techniques, and that was something that was really wrapping through my head. But my question to you is, during the season, do you watch film with the kids and with the players, and kind of show them what they're doing right and wrong and kind of help them on that? And if you are, how much talking are you doing? Not just in film, but on the court? Because I mean, their attention span isn't really there, even coaches too sometimes. But are you trying to keep it simple and saying the key words that are getting to these players? And then when you're making adjustments and tweaks to what they already bring to your program, is that just something that you're kind of adjusting more so than anything? Because it sounds like you are doing that.
So, and it's great that you asked that, Steve. Thanks for asking that. It's a really good question. And Shannon piggyback kind of with a comment here, which hopefully I can bring out too, which is, how do you actually coach within 5-on-5 is essentially what she's asking, and balancing stopping and starting, which is part of it. So I'll do 2 parts. I'll do that, and then remind me to come back to film, Steve, because it's essentially the same. And that is the use of questions. So for me, coaching a game situation in 5-on-5, the number one thing is I can't be soft as a coach. And I don't mean soft in terms of, telling them they're idiots or anything. I just mean, I can't be soft in not stopping it when it needs to be stopped. And that is another huge mistake I see at all levels of basketball, is coaches run great drills, or they run great small-sided games or different types of things, and they never stop it to correct. And to me, that's the time. So our trade-off, and you talk about our players not being engaged, how about you show up at practice, you play 5-on-5, we create different situations, different scenarios, constraints-led approach, if you understand constraints, different things to be able to shape the situation. And then we'll play sometimes 1 trip, sometimes we stay in the half court, but mostly we're in transition. So we'll play 3 trips of the floor. So I may script and organize the first trip, but after that, we're playing live basketball, offense versus defense, and competitive. So those opportunities right now give me really organic ways to be able to hold hold means hold the ball, no extra shot, no extra dribble. So classroom management strategies, those of you that taught in a classroom, you have a classroom management strategy. Could be stop, it could be your whistle. And then we're going to teach, and I'll give you some, I have a video clip here. I'll show you an example. We're going to teach very specifically and very quickly, either through implicit instruction or a question. And by the way, the other part about asking a question is, hey, Steve, what was your thought process on this closeout? And Steve pauses and he doesn't know, then I can always go, hey, Colleen, help him. Or Helen, help him. And I don't know about you guys, the best teacher I ever had was the one that scared me the most. And I mean that in the way that she was mean, she was great, but I had to show up every day prepared, because at any point she could ask me a question. And she taught me biomechanics in my master's degree. And it's still like, I don't use biomechanics much in my life, but I remember so much of it because she caused me to learn on my own, player-led development, right? Because I had to learn on my own, and she tested me on it every day to be prepared for it. And that was tremendous. So I have always believed in cold calling, meaning I'm not going to ask for answers. I'm going to call someone and say, Matthew, what's the answer? To me, yeah, that puts them on the spot a little bit, and that may be uncomfortable and all those different things. But if I did my job in the first place in creating psychological safety and continuing to create psychological safety, and a term I coined from Dave Smart in my many conversations with him, aftercare, which I think all the best coaches you've ever been around, all the best leaders you've ever been around are outstanding, maybe not even in the practice, maybe not even, anything to do with basketball, but they're great with aftercare. Meaning if something didn't go well, or if they feel that something's going on, they're the ones that can reach out and connect and help you understand more what it is. Because sport, we don't always have those opportunities. And aftercare is a huge part of that. So Steve, I am not afraid. First of all, beginning early in the year, we will stop at every single situation to coach it, because that's where they're learning. And the deal is, hey, listen, we can go do a drill. Okay, you guys want to go do a drill instead? We can go do a drill and I can really emphasize it, or I can coach it in this moment and hold you all accountable to what we're coaching, right? Because we know they learn by doing. And I'll show you an example here in a second. It's a balance for sure, and it's very individual because some players, but as a general rule here, say if more than 3 players are making the same mistake, then I'll stop it for the whole team. If it's only one player making the mistake, then we'll pull them out and coach them off the court. Right now, that's generally the idea. But early in the year, as you can imagine, we would stop it for everyone because the learning opportunity would be for everyone in that way. Film would be the same thing. My ideal world in terms of film, and again, I've just been blessed to be able to talk to so many coaches about these things, and I've floated this to many coaches at different levels, is to just spend way more time on individual or small group film rather than team film sessions. Because again, different learners have different needs. And it's not too hard nowadays to be able to create an edit for your players, 3-4 clips every practice or every game that connects, as I said, practice to game, and then shows them that they're making progress. And I think film tends to be so much, and I'm not saying there's anything wrong with pointing out mistakes, by the way, because mistakes are a part of learning and mistakes are necessary for learning. But what I'm saying is that film tends to be almost all mistakes for a lot of coaches. And you can imagine players don't enjoy that. So the other part about being in small groups, and Mark Daigneault, who's now the OKC Thunder head coach, when I get a chance to spend some time with him with the Blue, with the G League team, he did this constantly. Is he had different groups of 3 or 4 players, and he would do all of his film sessions in that way. One, he got more chance to be able to interact and connect with players every day. 2, he got a chance, and they were often very short, like could be 5-minute film sessions. You got a chance to ask questions in a less intimidating environment for a player, right? There's only 3 players there or 2 players instead of having the whole team there. So he found that he got more interaction and more engagement. So more Q and A types questions. So I think that was a really good part of it too. So anyways, I hope I kind of answered both those. If there's, can I just jump to the clip? I'll show you. If you're okay, share screen. So this is what I call coaching is teaching, connecting, and transfer. You're all good. I mean, we all generally are pretty good at teaching something. Whatever you believe in, you're going to teach. And then what's really important is connecting it. So making sure your players understand why you're teaching it, making sure how it helps them improve, or how it helps the team win. That's what connecting is. It is what I'm teaching helping you improve? Is it helping our team win? Like I have to constantly connect that. That's the why. Like basically anything I do in practice is to help my players improve or to help my team win. And both those help our team win. So really it's help my team win or improve if we don't want to say win. And then transfer is what I'm coaching in practice happening in the game. I can tell you many examples of coaches that do such great things in practice. And then I watch their teams play and I'm like, never doing that. Why are we spending time on practice on this when it doesn't happen in a game like this? And I challenge you to look at your players if you haven't yet. And if you want, just write this down. Stab dribble. You can go on BasketballImmersion.com and you can look up stab dribble and you can see a blog and a little bit of a video on that. Look at how your players, when they scrimmage without you controlling it, how they actually apply first step. Catch the ball and they're going to attack off the dribble. And stab dribble is an example of that. In Australia, they call it a throwdown dribble, but the rest of the world has been doing this for years. And I see this more and more in the college game, is that we're just letting players, again, get the ball to the floor. The concept of, taking a long first step or some of these different things, it just doesn't happen. It's not biomechanically correct, but it just doesn't happen as much. What players do is they just throw the ball down without stepping, and then they get into their decision or they get into their attack and different things like that. So there's an example of, I didn't learn that from clinics. I learned that from watching players. And then once I identified what my players were doing that I wasn't coaching, I questioned why I was coaching it. Why was I spending any time on first step, long steps, when my players just throw the ball down and go? That type of thing. This is just an aside and just an example. Here's a clip. Can you hear the audio too? So foul or hold. Foul means we're going to teach. Hold means hold the ball. We're going to probably be in transition. Those are my commands, but foul we need to teach. So we don't call fouls in practice. So there's no confusion like that. A foul is we need to improve something. And that's how we try and frame it for players. We also call players learners as much as possible in practice because we want to frame them that way. So many old stories, but, example would be, when I was growing up, my dad told me I could be anything I want. And then I started to love basketball coaching. My dad said, oh, no problem. You can be a basketball coach. And then every day you could frame it for me, say, you can be a basketball coach, as opposed to growing up in an environment where, say, a parent every day said, well, you're not going to amount to anything. You can't do that. You can't do that. Right. That's the mindset. So we're trying to frame players every day as learners. So we're going to use the term learners a lot in practice, in that way. So they made a mistake. So now we're going to foul and now we're going to teach. So whatever the mistake was, doesn't really matter right now. Recreate, and this is how we coach in 5-on-5. This is probably a first or second practice of our season getting ready for a Division I. That's why you see some coaches watching. They came to observe.
Great step. Great step. What was the advantage on the catch? Say it. Right. Are we okay if Tulay shoots that?
Are we okay if Tulay shoots that is creating psychological safety for him from his teammates. And then the use of the question to engage him in the answer. Of course, if he didn't know the answer, we could ask a veteran. He was a new player. We could ask a veteran. And the other part was to be able to give feedback, and consider this when you review and listen to yourself give feedback. Keep and add. Keep something, add something. Instead of the sandwich approach, which a lot of us grew up with and maybe still use, sandwich approach is like a positive, a negative, and a positive, or a negative, a positive, and a negative. And what I've learned about that is kind of, we don't know what they're going to interpret, right, as the message. I say to Matthew, I really like your hair. Not so sure about the shirt, but you're a good dude, right? Like at some point, he's not going to sure what I like. Does he like me or does he not like me? Instead, let's be honest and clear. Keep the skip pass, but let's add the shot. That's a team setting here, but that was the idea in terms of that. So we try and frame feedback in terms of keep and add.
He had arm length advantage. He's going to shoot it. When we dribbled to
Also, define decisions. We define open as more than arm length advantage. So if a defender's more than arm length away, then you have an advantage. And again, this is assuming you have the skill, so you're in range, in rhythm, however you want to define it, then we want that shot. You know, we want that shot. So that was our way. It's not just, okay, you're open. Well, what does open mean? Right? It's these things that we define that help our players to that next level. What does open mean in your program? Does a player truly understand what that means? Not open for us is a defender's arm length away. You know, in that type of situation, we try and frame it. Here's the other part. Shoot it or extra and play. So if what we're trying to do there is to get him to understand, yes, we want you to shoot it, but if you hadn't shot it, then we call it 0 seconds, playing with 0 seconds. That's our 0.5, which other people use. But it's like shoot it or extra and move it, right? Or extra and dribble handoff if you're a non-shooter, something like that. So we don't want this to be an absolute thinking he has to shoot the ball every time, but we do want him to catch it shooting the ball. And the decision not to shoot the ball is determined by the defense. It's not determined by me as a coach, and it's not determined by his teammates, although good to great sometimes works. By the way, I don't know if watch games and watch how many times I think players turn down shots because we built this mentality of good to great so well as coaches. The unintended consequences, we turn down open shots, right? Because one more. Well, then obsessively, we're just doing one more. I saw a college team do it the other night that basically maybe lost the game because they didn't shoot the open shot because probably someone was calling one more. Well, dude was open, but he was thinking one more and he wasn't thinking shoot. So these unintended consequences of what we say. Follow feedback with action. This comes back to Shannon's question is the number one thing that I can do to coach them within the context of the game is to follow feedback with action. Now, if I coach this and then we go back and restart, or, you know, there's all these different things. No, we just continue right from where we were. Follow feedback with action. Too often in summary feedback, and I'm not a big believer, I'm not anti-summary feedback, but I think it's limited because it doesn't connect players to the exact situation. If I had let this trip go there and back and then given them summary feedback, they wouldn't have been getting coached in the context of the game. Whereas in this situation, foul, recreate, and now we can go back to where the ball was skipped. This is 2-side fast break if you're familiar with that. If not, again, you can look that up on our website. But this skip pass right now, we want this player to understand not just that you're open, but we want the defender to go back to the context or to the position that they were in. So now they see context, right? And if I go back to do it in summary, they don't necessarily visualize and see the context. They don't see what they're supposed to perceive to make the decision to execute the skill. Hope that helps. Shannon, I hope that covers your question. And Steve, hopefully that connects to your question too.
Yeah, it does, Chris. I guess the thing too is like for somebody who wants to try to emulate all this, it takes some practice. Mm-hmm. It really does. You know, you're going through practice, and if you're not that type of person, it's not your personality and all that too, but you've got to kind of hone in on how you're speaking and the words you're saying, how your tone. And so I'm just trying to, I hear it, but for those out there that wants to try to provide the keep and add and all that, it's as a coach, it's going to take a lot of work too, I would say, but
it takes a lot of work.
Yeah.
It takes a lot of work, you know, but again, like I think in the end of the day, the value of it is that you become a better game coach as well. Think about this. How do you become a better game coach? You coach more games. Well, you don't coach enough games. Well, how do you become a better game coach? You coach more in practice, the game in practice. Then you become a better game coach. And I often think that my first practice, you know, coming back to one of that original questions is my first practice of the year ideally should be like a game, because now I can truly evaluate what I'm supposed to coach or what I'm supposed to coach more of. And that's the idea of like constantly testing them for retention. Do they remember or can they apply what I'm teaching? And then constantly testing them for, can they apply it in a game? Because again, at the end of the day, the perfect closeout doesn't help me in a game if I don't make the perfect decision on that closeout, right? So that's the part that constantly comes back.
So Chris, was all your conditioning done through 5-on-5?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. You've heard me say it on the podcast if you've listened enough, that one thing I would say about the NCAA, Division I model is that a lot of programs are super obsessed with conditioning. And to me, Jim Crutchfield talked about it on Nova Southeastern podcast, but I'm the same, is that we condition in practice. And you know what? We play a ton of 5-on-5 in practice. We played a ton of 5-on-5 in the off season. They got game-like conditioning because we're playing the game, right? And then anything above and beyond that, like some players needed it, some players didn't. But you don't have to be, a Navy SEAL to be able to play basketball, right? Like it's just not that way. And then I would say at the end of the day, would I want a player to be more skilled or more conditioned? More skilled. And I get you're limited in hours and some of your models and stuff like that. But to me, I would spend more time on film, more time on skill development, and when I say skill development, I say decisions and skill are the same. They're both skills, and less time on actual pure conditioning.
Chris, what about peer coaching, like their teammates?
Love it. Love it. Isn't that the best thing? Like the best thing is to be able to empower your players to be able to coach each other. And not just, and I think we think about that sometimes in like coaching them on the floor, but I think the best coaching from mentors within a team is helping them to understand that, oh, this is normal. I struggled like this too. I went through this too. I had the same challenges, I had the same difficulties. This may not work for you, but here's what I did. And I want to help you understand this is what I did. So maybe try it. And then if not, then let's talk about other things. No, that's absolutely the best thing at the end of the day would be, that you get to the point with your team. And certainly as your players progress through your program and you can go to someone, and you can say, Colleen, like I'm just going to go, Colleen, listen, you're in charge of this drill. We're on 5-on-5, 3 trips, wing ball screen to start, 2 teams, sub anytime it comes back, go. And then Colleen is now leading as a player and she has to put the players in that drill. And then from there, like that's teaching players how to self-organize, how to lead, how to follow, all those different things. And to be honest, the shy player on your team or the one that doesn't talk that much, they just need to be told a little bit what to do, how to do it, like what to say and how to say it, right? And then put them in a situation where they practice. And I can't remember whose podcast, but one of the coaches talked about that, which is again, putting players in situations where they had to present, in front of each other, because again, that helps them break down some of those barriers and creates more sympathy or more empathy than sympathy, which is also important.
Hey, Chris, quick question again. Sorry.
Oh, don't be sorry.
How much dialogue takes place during these, not between you and the player? Because if she or he's going back and forth, not in a bad way, but just questioning or asking, well, coach, if you're saying this, what if this happens and this not? Like, how much of that are you allowing, and how do you handle that, and so that it doesn't prolong practice or kind of go sidetrack?
So there's a bunch of different philosophies in terms of that. Number one is, look, this is a constant challenge to balance as a coach. Like, I'm a competitive asshole, so I have a real hard time in practice when it's not competitive. But I know through all my evidence-based research that having those uncompetitive moments, those debriefs, those conversations, I call them mini conversations, are arguably the most important part of moving learning from a one-time thing to permanent thing, right? And we know learning is permanent. Like a one-time performance is not learning. And that's the part of it. And a lot of that has to come from these mini conversations or these mini moments to be able to, again, explain, connect it, and then help them understand how it can help them, right? And I think that's the most important thing. Like any type of dissent, which is maybe the wrong word because that's a strong word, but any type of player misunderstanding or not understanding why usually is because I haven't done a great job connecting why it helps them improve and why it helps our team win. That's it. So those mini conversations are so important. And I believe culture ultimately is formed in practice more than it's formed anywhere else, right? Because we practice more than anything. You know, we can talk about team meals, we can talk about these or at beginning of the season type of things, or these lectures or all these different things. But you know what? Practice is the time where players are vulnerable. You know, we have the most intimate moments with our players. We just have this opportunity to be able to really, really shape culture through practice and helping them understand what you want and why you want it.
I think this is a good segue to talk about your podcast, because there was an episode that blew my mind, and I've sent it to probably 50 different coaches. Steve and Danelle are one of them. Pierre, your episode with Mark Bennett, episode 71, is it just like, what, I mean, I've listened to it and I have to commute, so I have time in the car. So, but I've listened to it at least 40 times. I mean, and it's a lot of the things you're talking about. And it's the players giving feedback with one another. You're empowering your players to not rubberneck over to the coach constantly and look for, because then they're not making their own decisions. The coach is making the decisions. The coach is spoon feeding them when to cut and when to do this. But if you can give them, I think he calls it the software, to really function as a unit on their own, where they're giving each other feedback and they're making decisions, and they see a different defense, they don't turn to the coach. They're making decisions on the fly. And that just sparked something in me that, I mean, and Alan Keene was one of your,
yeah, very similar philosophy. Yeah.
Yep. He studied with Mark Bennett, I think.
Yep.
But I mean, it's just, I'm kind of obsessed now with that, and with your and their just next level of coaching. It's basically what it is.
Yeah.
In my opinion.
Well, as an aside, Matthew, when we get this pandemic out of the way, let's talk. I'll bring Mark over and we'll do something for coaches. That'd be a lot of fun. Mark and I have talked about it for years. He was going to come to Vegas last year, and we're going to do some stuff there. So, you know, we'll figure that out. But anyways, look, we're afraid. I think that's the right word, to give players power, because we're not sure what they're going to do with it. And that means essentially what Mark and Alan say is that means we haven't done our job. Like, and again, it comes back to, is this a dictatorship, right? Or is this an environment where it's democratic, but as we know about democracy, at some point, there's still people that make decisions, right? And that's cool, because a democracy sometimes is, look, you either do it my way or you leave, right? Or you're gone, or you don't play, or whatever those things are. But what Mark and what Alan and Mike McCabe, works for Basketball Canada, again, they try and frame things as transformational rather than transactional. And I'm assuming a lot of you have heard of that if you're into growth mindset and you talk about the difference between a transaction, either do this or you won't play, right? It's a negative consequence, it's a threat, whatever you want, versus if you do this, you have a chance to get better and to play more, right? And which one do you think the player would be? Look, I get it. Tons of people still say, oh, I'd love to be coached that way. Okay. You know, because you're used to it and you've gotten better. And sometimes players get better despite the coaching, as we know. But most of it comes down to what type of person do you want to be, you know, as a coach. So, so much of what they all emphasize is this transformational aspect of it, is I'm trying to transform you. I'm not trying to get you to do it because of some power I hold over you. And that's where, again, the collective is obviously more powerful than the one. And that's where that team oriented, and all three of them are really big on debriefs. And to the point that after almost every drill, They will have different types of pockets where they'll just debrief. And I forget the exact terminology off the top of my head, but they all have different acronyms. They actually, all three of those coaches have different acronyms for that. If you remind me, Matthew, I can send you. But Mike McKay on his podcast with me talked about that too.
Yeah. And this just leads into that being my favorite episode of yours. I'd like to hear your, there's so many different types of coaches that have been on your podcast. And let's say Mark Bennett, you can't reference Mark Bennett or Alan Keene. What were your maybe one or two or five where just something came up where it blew your mind, or I know it's happened a bunch of times, but what stands out as you think back on your own podcast about someone that really opened your eyes to something new?
So much for me. Like, first of all, I'm going to answer this very politically and say I haven't done my best episode yet. Most powerful word in learning, yet. So I would never tell anyone that I had a favorite episode, in a sense, because it's like, well, then what? So it's always a yet. And that's really what I value about it too, is like that challenge to be able to do that. But I will say that, some of my favorite podcasts are obviously the ones where the phrasing comes to me in some way. And I'll be honest, I don't exactly know who said this, but they said in the podcast, and it might have been Mike McKay or whoever it was, but they said may reduce current performance, but improve for future learning. It might have been Joe Bowl in one too, that we talked about practice line, but it may reduce current performance, but improve future learning. I just love that terminology, because what that became for me is a disclaimer to coaches and a disclaimer to players to understand, listen, the way we practice may reduce your current performance because it's going to be unpredictable. You're going to get coached while you play the game. There's going to be, Messi's almost overused nowadays, but that type of messy learning. But we're going to coach you, and we're going to coach you hard, and we're going to correct you, and we're going to help you get better. But you may not feel like it initially. And this was a common challenge, and comes back to Steve's question as a young coach who might go this way and coach this way. It is hard because it's really hard to evaluate whether your team's getting better sometimes, because you know what, when you do three-man weave, they look like they're getting better. Oh, we're really clean. We're not making mistakes. We're meeting the time. We're meeting the score. Okay, that's cool. Nothing wrong with that. But at the end of the day, does that help you in the game? Right? And that's the challenge in terms of those things. So I like that idea of the practice disclaimer. I think it was Brett Richard who talked about the different types of mindset training, and then superseding all else is psychological safety, which is you are belong and you are improving. So to me, what that came back to, which is what Corey and John Tower talked about as well, which is in different ways, what it all comes back to is how much time are we spending on coping strategies? Like teaching players how to cope with things. Right? That's the number one thing. It's like, you're going to have adversity. You're going to struggle. Somebody asked me the other day how to get out of a shooting slump. I said, relax into it. Like, accept it. Don't fight it. Right? And that's Eastern philosophy a little bit and some of these different things, but it's like this mindset that we have. Oh, you know what? I should work harder. I should change my technique. I should do some, what? Most players at your level, it's all psychological. It's helping them to understand that this is normal. And that's what I try and frame for all, coaches, youth level on up, is like, what can we normalize? Right. And that's back to Colleen's point about, mentors and peer teaching and all that stuff. It's like just normalizing things. This is normal. I couldn't do this once. Now I can do it. That's normal. And, whatever's happened in our world, we know that criticism has become a negative, where criticism in reality is a positive. Like, criticism doesn't necessarily mean negative. It just means improve. We have to improve at something, and that you need some type of critical analysis to be able to do that. So try and frame things a little bit that way too. I'm
Coach, can I just add?
Bunch. Yeah, sorry.
Can I add one thing? I think that's so true. And I wanted to just kind of get your opinion, because I feel like on the women's side, and I've used this with some of my coaching friends here on this, but I truly feel like, a guy can go out and miss 10 shots in a game, and he still thinks he's the best shooter out there on the court. On the women's side, however, I think that's where it comes, as coaches, we really have to work really hard to help build their confidence. And I'm not saying all women, but I see this a lot at my level, at least, where they need that reassurance. They need that extra one-on-one time. Maybe I'm gonna, hey, let's look at your shots from the last game. Let's just take a look and have them talk it out. But I've noticed that on the women's side. And I don't know if you've noticed a difference either.
So I have a hard time generalizing, and that's the challenge for all of these conversations. Is definitely I've coached guys that struggle exactly the same way, but what guys tend to do is they tend to not show it, right? It tends to be hidden, right? But it's still there. And then the female player tends to show it. And that's what the difference is. And it's such a fascinating thing. And I have 2 daughters. They're 8 and 10. And I do see it, the danger of how they're socialized. Like even at the playground at a really young age, someone will come over to them, a complete stranger, and tell them to be careful when they're doing something risky. But, meanwhile, boys could be hanging completely upside down off of one toe, and nobody's going to say, be careful. So there's these things that I think are socialized into, men or women, that we have to, as people who coach young people or parents or stuff like that, over time, I think this will change as we are more aware of the words that we use and the things that we frame. And I think that's such a great question and such a great point. And again, what does it speak back to is this psychological safety, and what that psychological safety means for that specific person is very different. And that's where, relationships and culture, whatever you want to say, that's where that is. But to me, it's mini conversations. It's aftercare. It's mini conversations. It's constantly having those moments. And, just that's the realities, as we said, to come back to be able to normalize these behaviors so they spend less time in those moments, and then applying coping strategies, which I'm sure you've talked about coping strategies on here, parking, thought stopping, all those different things that come with actual game performance, to be able to apply. Such a great question. Oh, sorry, can I say one other thing? Skill equals confidence. Having taught summer camps for about 25 years and getting asked constantly from parents, how do I help my son or daughter be more confident? They need to get more skilled. Skilled players are confident. So it's not magic. Like, your key is, how much time does that player spend? And I ask the parent, I ask the player, how much time do you spend on the game on your own? How much time do you spend working on your dribbling? Well, you're not confident with your dribble because you're not good with your dribble. Like, come on, it's just not magic, right? Skill equals confidence. So, a player that's not confident in something isn't as skilled, or doesn't realize they're as skilled at that.
I'm curious, Chris, when did you first record yourself at practice?
So it would have been about 12 years ago, in, say, my second, third year at Windsor. And I was just very fortunate. I've always been aligned with academia. I don't read books, so don't ask me my favorite books, but I read, I'll read journal articles. I'll certainly read articles and different things like that, just because I like information coming in short bursts. And then if I want more, I can go down that rabbit hole of different things. So what it became was, a skill acquisition professor at my university was actually doing a study where they came to me and they said, would you be okay, and just by circumstance, would you be okay if we recorded you? And at first, I was relatively young at the time, and, not necessarily as confident as I could have been as a coach. I was at first like, maybe they'll catch me saying stuff that I don't want people to hear. But then it quickly became, wait a minute. Like, when I actually listen to myself now, I'm like, whoa, people need to hear that I'm not saying the right thing. And I need to get better at saying the right thing to help my players. And I went to the point, and I'm not sure how many of you would be comfortable with this, but I went to the point, and Zach Boiver, who was on podcasts with me, 2 of them, but one he did on basically dealing with our emotions as coaches. We talked about this, but he got feedback from players about his coaching. And to me, that's become one of the most important things, is to be able to watch some video of practice with my players, usually in the off season, and say, hey, listen, what do you think? What do you feel? What's your impression? Just ask them, because they're the end user. great computer term, but they're the end user. So we have to constantly think about the end user. What's their experience, right? And in designing, I'm just redesigning my whole website, and that is the constant question. Okay, does this actually help the end user? And if not, get rid of it. Okay, it does, then keep it, right? That type of thing. So I think that's a part of it.
And then on that same topic, what are your thoughts about your future in coaching?
So many thoughts. Let me throw out one other podcast, by the way. When Jeff Van Gundy came on the podcast and said he wished he played more 5-on-5, and I swear the conversation and my questions were completely different. Like, I was not prepared for him to say that, and it was like the happiest moment of my life. And then from there, the conversation went the direction I was like, oh, this is amazing. And it's interesting when coaches have that time to have introspection or to watch other practices and go through that and kind of go, whoa, you know what? We don't play a lot of basketball in practice sometimes. It's like, okay, well, that type of thing. So my career is just wonderful right now. So I'm happy doing this. I'm not saying I'm not interested in coaching, because I love coaching. But I feel like what I get an opportunity to do now is serve the game in a way that magnifies 20-fold, 30-fold, 100-fold my impact on just a team.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I'm grateful for that. By the way, I never thought this. I'm an introvert. Like, I'm really not that outgoing a person or anything like that. But as you know, skill equals confidence. So you get good at something because you practice it a lot. And that's really with the podcast and with these different things. And it's become that. And the other thing that I'm absolutely obsessed with, and I hope that shines through in the podcast, is I'm obsessed with the question. Like, we spend so much time, and you've been around people in your life that you have these conversations with people, and you go through a whole conversation with someone and they never ask you a question. And you just go, wow, they missed an opportunity. And I'm never going to be that person. Like, if I'm going to be in front of you and I visit you, and I hope I get to visit some of you, especially that are on the West Coast as this clears up, man, I'd love to sit there after practice and just ask you questions and just have you, again, I got to create that environment where, Matthew doesn't think I'm telling him he's wrong, right? I'm just curious. I'm just asking questions, and that part of it. And that's really what the podcast and what I've really valued about this. So, my phone number's there. My cell phone's up there if you didn't see it. And my DMs are open as well. So you're welcome to text me. I am happy to have the conversations and to continue to help support the game. And I've done this a few times. I haven't done it enough on the women's side. So please encourage anybody that's interested. Like, I'm more than happy. I'm doing it with a bunch of coaches with the Japanese Federation next week. Like, I just love getting on and having these conversations and improving. So anything I can do in support of you or your game, just please feel free to reach out.